I am going to do a different type of video today, and it's raining really heavily. I hope that y'all can see me pretty good. Yeah, maybe. Okay, so I'm backing out of my driveway. And I am going to head over to Donald's to get an iced tea. And I'm going to go get some gas. But while you guys are along for the ride with me, I've decided that I'm going to reveal a little bit about myself. This actually makes me quite uncomfortable, so if you're seeing this, it all worked out okay, and I'm publishing it, so let's see. I want to start out by saying that yesterday I had to take a mental health day. I just had to regroup and get myself together because I'm getting a lot of hate on my videos, and I don't think that it's all well deserved, but I want to talk about my life and give you guys a little insight on the things that have happened to me. I have not had a great life. There's been moments of joy. There's been a lot of happiness, but at the same time, it's mixed with sadness and tragedy. So when I was a little kid, up until about the age of 11, I grew up with an abusive father. Now, most of his abuse was directed at my mother, but I did experience some of it myself. Like one quick snippet into that life with the abuse that I endured. One time I was laying in bed sleeping, and my dad woke me up to his belt. And that is like one of the worst ways to wake up. And it was all over a misunderstanding. My dad used to work on cars, and he thought that I messed with his car, and it was actually my cousin who did that. It wasn't me, but I got the belt as a result of his screwing around with my dad's car. So my dad was a man to be feared. He had a lot of problems with breaking the law and just overall being a person that you just don't want to mess with. So he abused my mother for years, and when my mom finally decided to make a decision to get away from him, she uprooted me and my brother, and we moved 1,300 miles away. And he left her alone after that. This was after they were divorced, and he continued to stalk her. And just, we moved around town a lot, and she'd hope each time that he wouldn't find out where she was living, but he always did. I mean, people would talk, and they'd let the cat out of the bag about her address. And plus, he also would follow her around. So all he had to do was follow her home, and he knew where we lived. So fast forward to moving out of state. When I got here in Ohio, I really didn't like it. I actually abhorred living in Ohio. And I mean, it's become home now, but that took a long time for me. And actually, we just had our 30-year anniversary of moving here on March 22nd. So we've been here for 30 years now. Let me order my drink.
Thank you for choosing McDonald's. How can I help you?
Yes, I'd like a large unsweetened iced tea, and that's all.
Okay, one large unsweet tea. Your total is $1. Go ahead and pull around.
Thank you. I always say thank you. I think that you should thank people for doing something for you. So where was I? Yeah, living in Ohio was not the greatest. You know, I'd been bullied in school when I lived in Oklahoma, but the bullying got worse when I moved here.
Hi, $1. Have a good day.
Thank you. And my self-esteem was low. I was depressed, and I experienced my first occurrence of mental illness. I started depersonalizing, which is when you feel like you're not real. So we'd go... Hi. Thanks. You too. So we'd like go to the store, and I'd be walking around, and I'd just be feeling like, oh wow, this is just not real. This is not really happening. It's like an out of body experience, and it pushed me further into what I think now is a depression that I had when I was in my teenage years and my preteen years. Which, fast forward to 2001, when 9/11 happened, I was affected very deeply by it. I was like really scared, really torn apart, really grievous for the for the families that lost their loved ones, and I couldn't get it out of my head, so I dwelled on it, and it actually resulted partially in me having a psychotic break. And I had this when I was 24 years old. And this was like nothing that ever happened to me before. I can't even really put into words the experience I went through. But I was not myself. And basically, I began to think that I was actually in a coma. So my mom started being clued in that something wasn't right with me, and I was hospitalized. Now, during the course of my stay at the hospital, I don't feel that it was therapeutic at all. I feel the hospital setting doesn't really help people. Maybe the medications do, but I mean, to be honest with you, I think that at that time, which was nearly 20 years ago, the mental health system wasn't as good as it is today. And I think that just because it keeps getting better is no excuse for how you can end up being treated. So I ended up spending a month in the hospital, and I was completely and totally out of my mind. I mean, if you knew who I was and knew me, that person that I was no longer there. And it took me a whole entire month to become stable enough. Okay, I'm gonna get my gas and then I'll be right back. Okay, back on the road. I'm gonna take a little segue from the story I was telling you before to kind of go into some of the things that precipitated my breakdown, if that's what you want to call it. I know that breakdown's not necessarily a medical term, but that's what I did. I had a complete and total breakdown. But I followed in the footsteps of my mother and continued the cycle of abuse. And I ended up with marrying a man who everybody, when they first meet him, they think he's a great guy. But, you know, if you spend any amount of time with him, he ain't fooling anybody. But I spent a long time in a bad marriage to a man who psychologically abused me. And he is what I'd like to call a narcissist, but he was actually diagnosed with borderline personality disorder when he was in the military and he got kicked out. And he gaslighted me for years, and he physically abused my children. He never put his hands on me, but he did do things like hold me down and restrain me, and did things like not let me call my mother while we were having a fight or dispute. And I mean, there are also just little things that he did to just like kind of mess with me. An example I can think of right off the top of my head is we had a DVD player on our entertainment center, and I kind of liked it to be centered in the middle, so that's where I would put it, and then he would come behind me and push it to the side. And then when I would question him about it, he would say, I didn't do that. You know, it was just like really weird stuff, and he would unscrew the light bulbs so that I would think that they were burned out, and just anything he could do to mess with my mind. And finally, with the advent of 9/11 and his abuse, all those things came to a head, and then I spent that month in the hospital. And this is not even all of the dirty things that he did to me and the kids, which hopefully I can get into that in another video, but I don't really want to focus on that right now because I want to focus on talking about my mental health. So after I spent that month in the hospital, I came home, but not to my home. I went to my mother's, and I was on all these medications that I had never been on before, and they made me feel really weird. I didn't feel like myself. So that threw me into, after what I had was a manic state, into a deep, dark depression. And I spent a whole entire month sleeping, or what, you know, like trying to sleep on my mother's couch. I don't think I did much sleeping. And at the time, my brother was really into the song In the End by Linkin Park. And every time I would hear that song, it would just make me feel like everything was hopeless. And now I have come to appreciate that song after all these years, but for a long, long time when I would hear that song, it would make me feel uncomfortable. And then after about a month, I started to come around. I started to feel a little bit better. So I felt like it was time to maybe go back to work. I called my employer and told her I was ready to come back to work, And this is when she informed me that my position was no longer available because she had given it to another staff member. At the time, I told her, well, hey, I'm going to file for unemployment then, because she was a really small company. She didn't want to, I guess, have her insurance rates go up. So she said, well, I'll put you on the schedule. But she put me on an 8-hour shift once a week that was with another person. So I just got a real eerie feeling that she didn't really understand or was succumbing to stigma about mental illness, when the whole time is she had a business that dealt with people who had disabilities. So why was my disability something that she couldn't handle? So in hindsight, I wish that I had applied for underemployment and unemployment, because I didn't know that if your employer takes all your hours away from you that you can still get unemployment. But I didn't do that. That's one of my regrets. I later found out about a man who did work there who did end up getting unemployment benefits from her company, because I guess she fired him in an unjust way. And to this day, I kind of resent her, but I have bigger problems than worrying about that old job. So all in all, I ended up, over the last 16 years, I believe it's been, maybe 17 now, but it doesn't really matter. I ended up in the hospital more than 13 times. And each time it would be harder for me to come back to reality. There were a lot of times that I went off my meds because they made me feel so crappy. And every time I did, I know, and I found out where that would land me. So I finally decided to make a commitment to keep myself on my meds, because I do have children. And another story is that in my divorce from my ex-husband, he ended up taking my kids from me because he used my mental illness against me. And okay, it's okay, I got them back, but it was a really, really hard time. And it's just so sad that he was the abuser in the relationship, and he ended up turning that around on me for a long time. It felt like an eternity. And now I am stable. I have been since 2016. It's been 3 years. I just want to say, though, that I've, for the most part, kept all of this stuff private. I haven't really discussed it with anybody. I mean, I don't go out and say, hey, I have bipolar disorder, which I don't even know if I agree with that diagnosis, but that's the diagnosis I have right now. There is just so much stigma associated with mental illness, and it really needs to change, because I really believe it's unfair. Mental illness is nothing to be ashamed of. I hope that I can inspire other people to talk about theirs. And the more awareness that is made in the world about this, the more people can come out and get comfort and release themselves from feeling that they can't talk to anybody about it because of the stigma. And I'm hoping that if I share my story, And I know I say this a lot, but if I can help one person, then that would make me happy. And I just really feel that this is something that needs to be talked about. I also got inspired from another channel that's called Living Well with Schizophrenia. It's a girl who talks about her experiences with her illness. She's very articulate and well-spoken, and she does her videos very well. I mean, way better than I have done this one. So I am going to link her channel in the description below, and hopefully we can spread this awareness and get people to open up about it and quit hiding it from the world. I mean, I know I hid it from the world, and the only thing that did was stuff all the emotions down and make it hard for me to even talk about it. I just sometimes feel like the story of my life is so complicated, and there's so many factors involved that I have to be really, I don't even know what the word is for it, but I have to come to a point where I can talk about all these things without sounding like an idiot, basically. And like I said, there's just so many details and so many things that come into play. I mean, I could write a book about all the horrific experiences that I've had in my life, and I don't even know if it would be believable, because the truth is stranger than fiction. And my experiences with being in the mental health facilities were not always positive. I had some really terrible things happen to me, and I really feel that things need to change. Alright, you guys, I'm not going to keep talking about this anymore for today, but if you leave a comment down below, I can answer your questions that you might have. I'd like to know if you'd like to see more videos like this. I'd also like to know which of my videos that you enjoy more, because I can do more serious talks and more heavier topics like this, but I really enjoy having a lot of fun on my channel, so who knows? We'll see where it goes. Alright, thank you guys.